There are certain stories that are so strange, so unbelievable that you'd think they were made up, and today's story is one of them. If you stay until the end, you'll discover why one of the top American educational institutions sent a team on a special mission just to verify this story, and they were completely shocked to learn it was true. So keep watching to hear the entire tale. Our story begins at the end of December 1984 in a small village in northern India. A young woman named Sumitra had just given birth to her first child. That baby boy was the greatest thing to ever happen to her. He was her only wish in life, and finally, God had granted it. She kept him tied to her chest wherever she went while cooking, cleaning, or working. Every now and then, she would smile and gently pat the baby wrapped close to her. Life in Sumitra's village was anything but easy. It was a poor village, located in the southern foothills of the Himalayas, along the banks of the Ganges. The people there lived in mud huts with thatched roofs. They had no electricity, and none of the villagers had ever gone to school. When Sumitra was young, her mother passed away and her father had to travel for work. Her uncle raised her, but she often felt lonely. Now married, Sumitra's husband was also frequently away for work. She lived with her in-laws in a small hut, but there was no closeness between her and her husband's family. She felt like she was forced to live with them. Even after marriage, she still felt alone. But when her son was born, everything changed. For the first time in her life, she felt she wasn't alone. She was excited, happy that her life finally had a new purpose. Then, one day in early 1985, everything changed. Sumitra was walking through the village with her baby tied to her chest and a metal bucket in her hands, on her way to fetch water from the well. Suddenly, she froze in place like a statue and dropped the bucket. Two villagers heard the loud clang and looked toward the sound. They saw Sumitra standing completely still. One of them approached her cautiously, worried, and asked if she was okay, but Sumitra didn't respond. She didn't move. He looked at her hands and saw that her fingers were bending backwards unnaturally. The joints had twisted in the opposite direction. When he looked at her face, he saw that the whites of her eyes had rolled back into her skull, and her entire eyes turned white. She began to grind her teeth so hard it made loud, cracking sounds. Her jaw was moving intensely, as if she were chewing her own teeth. The man was terrified and jumped back. Meanwhile, her baby, tied to her chest, began to cry uncontrollably. This disturbing scene quickly drew a crowd. Villagers gathered, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, just as unexpectedly as it began, Sumitra snapped out of it. She looked around at the crowd surrounding her and at her crying baby. She was confused and had no idea why people were staring at her. Embarrassed, she picked up her baby and the fallen bucket and continued walking to the well. She had no memory of what had just happened. A few weeks later, it happened again. This time, her father-in-law was nearby as she cooked. She suddenly froze. Her fingers bent back and her eyes rolled up. He tried to shake her out of it, but failed. She remained in that state for about 10 minutes before snapping out of it again, confused and unaware. By May 1985, these episodes were happening almost daily. Sometimes they lasted hours. During the trances, Sumitra began speaking in strange, incoherent language. At times, she would scream that her head was breaking and that she needed help. Then her voice would drop to a whisper as she said, "All I can see is darkness." Her family brought in local doctors to examine her. But aside from the trances, she seemed physically healthy. No one could explain her condition. Then, on July 16, 1985, while cooking, she fell into another trance. But this time, she calmly said, "I will die in 3 days." When she woke up, her in-laws told her what she had said. Sumitra was terrified. Her mother-in-law took the baby so Sumitra wouldn't drop him if another episode occurred. Her father-in-law called his son back from work to stay with her. Everyone braced for July 19th, the day Sumitra had predicted she would die. On that day, Sumitra was very cautious. She avoided anything dangerous. She didn't go near the fire or climb any stairs. Her mother-in-law held the baby the entire day. As the day passed with no incidents, the family began to relax. In the evening, Sumitra decided to stand outside the hut to get some fresh air. As she stood by the door, she saw a friend across the road and waved for her to come over. But before her friend could reach her, Sumitra froze again. Her eyes rolled back, her fingers stiffened, and she entered another trance. Her friend wasn't alarmed she had seen Sumitra in this state before, but this time was different. Sumitra raised her hands toward her head, clawing at the air as if trying to grab something above her. Her breathing became intense and loud. Then she stood still again, her hands by her sides, and emitted a deep, raspy sound from her throat. By now, her husband and neighbors had heard the commotion and gathered around. A doctor was quickly summoned. As he pushed through the crowd to examine her, he checked her pulse, heart, eyes, and mouth. Then he stepped back, pale and afraid, and announced Sumitra was dead. Her husband collapsed in grief. Her mother-in-law, holding the baby, was in disbelief. Sumitra's body remained upright and stiff, her eyes rolled back, her face frozen in what looked like a silent scream. The doctor and her father-in-law carefully laid her body on the ground and closed her eyes. There was no nearby hospital. Following Hindu tradition, her body would be cremated. The women in the village began washing her body and applying aromatic oils. The men gathered firewood for the cremation. Despite their sorrow, many villagers were afraid. They feared she was possessed. The fact that she had predicted her own death terrified them. As sunset approached, only the women preparing the body and the men building the pyre remained outside. One woman was combing Sumitra's hair when she suddenly screamed and pointed. Everyone turned to look at the body. They saw her eyes, still closed, darting back and forth under the eyelids like someone having a nightmare. Then her eyelids fluttered, and she let out a loud exhale. She opened her eyes wide and sat up. The women around her shrieked in terror and ran. Sumitra had been dead for 45 minutes. Her heart had stopped. Her face had gone pale. She had been declared dead. Now she was alive. Sumitra began wiping the oils from her face. The doctor, still nearby, rushed back in and helped her stand. He examined her again, stunned. "How do you feel?" he asked. "I'm okay," she replied. The doctor turned to the terrified women and said with joy, "You have just witnessed a miracle. Sumitra has returned from the dead." Her husband was speechless. Then he ran to embrace her, overcome with joy. But Sumitra pulled back, terrified, and raised her hands to stop him. The doctor gently touched the husband's shoulder and said, "Give her time. She's been through something unimaginable. She needs to heal." In the hours after her resurrection, the atmosphere in the village shifted from fear to stunned awe. Sumitra was alive. Not only alive, but conscious, speaking, and walking. The very same people who had prepared her body for cremation now stood speechless, unsure whether to celebrate or be afraid. That night, Sumitra was kept under constant observation by her family. No one wanted to sleep. Everyone stayed up, watching her from a distance, whispering among themselves, was this truly a miracle or something darker? Over the following days, Sumitra slowly regained her strength. She began eating again, walking normally, and holding her baby. But she was quiet, very quiet. Her eyes were distant, as if they had seen something no one else could understand. Her family began to notice subtle changes in her behavior. She no longer acted like the same Sumitra. She was forgetful, often silent, and sometimes spoke in a tone unfamiliar to those closest to her. There were moments when she would stare at empty corners of the room and whisper to herself. Her voice would change, sometimes deep and gravelly, sometimes soft and melodic. She even began referring to herself in the third person. Rumors started spreading fast. Some villagers claimed she was possessed by a spirit. Others believed she had seen the afterlife and returned with knowledge beyond human understanding. The more religious villagers believed it was divine intervention. Some, however, were terrified, convinced that what came back wasn't entirely human. Eventually, the story caught the attention of nearby towns, and from there, the regional press. Within weeks, the incredible tale of Sumitra's death and resurrection reached national headlines in India. The bizarre case drew attention from doctors, spiritual leaders, and scientists alike. Everyone wanted to understand what had happened. As media coverage grew, the story reached international ears. That's when an elite academic institution from the United States took notice. They sent a small team of researchers and anthropologists to India, tasked with uncovering the truth. When they arrived at the village and met Sumitra, they were taken aback. The Americans interviewed her, examined her medical records, and spoke to everyone who had witnessed the events. The reports, the timeline, the condition of her body, everything aligned. They had no explanation. The lead researcher wrote in his report, "This case defies all known medical, biological, and neurological understanding. If verified, it could be one of the rarest documented cases of full biological shutdown followed by spontaneous revival. But it wasn't just a scientific mystery. For many, it was a spiritual awakening. Religious leaders began visiting the village, offering prayers and interpreting her return as a sign from the divine. Pilgrims came from across the region to see the woman who had died and returned. Some brought offerings. Some brought questions, and some came in search of miracles. Sumitra, however, remained withdrawn. She never fully described what she had seen during those 45 minutes. When asked, she would only say, "I remember darkness, and then I was surrounded by voices, not of this world. Was it heaven? Was it a vision? Or was it something else entirely? No one ever truly knew." Eventually, as time passed, the crowds lessened. The news faded. The research teams left. Life in the village returned to its slow, rural pace, but for Sumitra and her family, nothing was ever the same. Even years later, people would travel to the village and ask, "Is this where the dead woman lived?" Sumitra never experienced another trance after that day. Whatever had gripped her before had vanished. Her health remained steady, and her son grew up healthy and strong. Yet, deep in the eyes of the villagers, and in the silence of Sumitra herself, the mystery lived on. A story so strange, so unimaginable that it left behind more questions than answers. And that's where our story ends. A mother, a prophecy, a death, and a resurrection. One moment that defied science, shook faith, and etched itself into legend. After the crowd dispersed, Sumitra returned to her hut. The doctor told her husband not to worry and to let her rest for the night. He promised to return the next morning to check on her again. The next day, when Sumitra woke up, she appeared to be in much better health than the night before. Her thoughts, once foggy, now seemed clear. But the moment she saw her husband and his family, fear overtook her. She ran out of the hut in panic. The doctor, who was just arriving, saw her running with her husband and in-laws chasing behind. He joined in to help. When the husband finally caught her arm, she shoved him away and screamed, "How dare you touch another man's wife?" She struggled and shouted, telling everyone around her, "This is not my home, and you are not my family." Despite their efforts, they couldn't calm her. The doctor and her husband dragged her back into the hut as she cried out, "My name isn't Sumitra." Over the following days, her family and the doctor tried to help her recover her memory, but nothing worked. She refused to hold or even touch her baby, saying, "I don't want this child. Bring me Rinku and Tinku." No one in her family knew who Rinku and Tinku were. Sumitra had never attended school or learned to read or write. Yet now she was writing letters, pleading for strangers to come and rescue her and take her home. She even noticed an old scar on her leg and asked how it got there. She began wearing her scarf in a completely new way, refused to eat from her family's dishes, and her voice changed faster, louder, and ruder. Her husband, family, and villagers slowly adapted, assuming her brief death had caused severe psychological damage. They stopped trying to restore her memory and focused instead on preventing her from hurting herself or running away. 3 months after her near-death experience, on October 20th, 1985, someone knocked on the door. Her husband opened it to find a well-dressed stranger holding a large, leather-bound book. He looked nervous and hesitant. The man introduced himself as Ram Tripathi and asked if there was a woman in the village who had recently begun behaving strangely. The husband had no idea who this stranger was or how he knew about his wife's condition. He assumed he might be a spiritual healer. He went to Sumitra and told her that a man named Ram Tripathi was asking for her. To his shock, she lit up with joy, jumped up, and ran to hug the stranger. She whispered something in his ear, and Ram immediately pulled back in shock, asking her, "What is your name?" She replied, confidently, "Shiva." He led them outside to a low wall and sat them down. He opened his book, which turned out to be a family photo album. He pointed to a picture and asked Sumitra if she recognized anyone. Without hesitation, she named every person correctly. Ram turned to another page and repeated the process. Again, she identified everyone. Then he pointed to a specific photo of a woman. Sumitra paused, visibly angry, and said, "That's my husband's sister. She killed me by smashing a brick into my skull." Ram dropped the album, hugged Sumitra, and sobbed. He then asked the husband to let him explain everything. He revealed a shocking story. Sumitra was not Sumitra. She was Shiva, a well-educated woman from a wealthy family who lived 100 kilometers away. Shiva had 2 sons, one of whom was born the same day as Sumitra's child. Unlike Sumitra, Shiva was miserable. Her in-laws hated her for her education and wealth. By 1985, Shiva was sending letters to her family begging them to save her. On May 18, 1985, neighbors saw her in-laws carrying her unconscious body toward the railway tracks. The next morning, her body was found near the tracks but without any signs of being hit by a train. There was only a severe head injury. Before Shiva's family could intervene, her in-laws cremated her body. The local police accepted the in-laws' claim that she had committed suicide. When Sumitra died and returned to life in July 1985, rumors spread about a village girl claiming to be someone else. Shiva's father, Ram Tripathi, heard these rumors and decided to investigate. When he visited Sumitra, she recognized him, whispered "Papa" in his ear, and correctly named 15 people in the photo album. She even recalled how she had been murdered, a detail no one else knew. This story caught the attention of researchers at the University of Virginia, who documented it as one of the most compelling cases of reincarnation ever recorded. Sumitra began to accept her new life. She eventually embraced her son and lived with her husband in their small hut until her death in 1998. And that is where this extraordinary story ends.